A year of war has crippled the country's economy as Russian attacks devastate energy infrastructure, disrupt production, and block ports. But work does go on despite the attacks. DW's correspondent Nick Connolly has met with people in the Dnipro region who are keeping Ukraine's metals industry going in the face of airstrikes.
It's a sound that means one thing: time to head for safety underground. No matter how many times you've heard it, it never stops being unnerving. When war began, seeking shelter also meant stopping work. A year on, and production at this metal plant continues regardless. Thanks to this improvised setup, little more than a few computers and an internet connection, the people down here can keep the machines running up above. Their boss shows us his emergency supplies. If needed, he tells us, they could survive on these provisions for days or even weeks. So far, this plant hasn't been hit. With Russian troops still less than 100 kilometers away, the risks are real.
This is war, and no one can possibly know what will happen tomorrow. We can't afford not to be prepared. I pray we'll never need any of this.
But other Ukrainian companies have been less fortunate. 2 Russian missiles, a few days apart, hit this production site in Dnipro, killing 2 people. Had the first strike not come on the weekend, that figure would likely have been far higher.
It's a lottery. It's a lottery. The rocket can come anytime, at any place, at any house, at any facility. My first time here, I saw only pictures. Didn't want to come because I remember equipment. I remember how much effort we spent making all this, and that's Russian world that came to my plant. That's how it looks like.
We visit another of Vyacheslav's factories. It's still going, but it's struggling with the effects of Russian attacks on Ukraine's power system.
Every time the power goes off, when we have a rocket alarm, because the last couple of months, when there is a rocket alert, the energy company turns off all the electricity, and that happens unpredictably. Every time this happens, we lose around 40 to 50,000 euros in 1 minute. The materials inside, they cannot lose the temperature. When they lose the temperature, they crack and they break.
Generators have made all the difference. Workers can now prevent uncontrolled shutdowns, buying time to pipe in natural gas that stabilizes the temperature until mains electricity returns. Where before they would lose days of production every time the power went off, now it's down to a matter of hours. But power isn't the only problem they're dealing with here. Ukrainian firms operating against all the odds are increasingly finding that many customers in Europe don't want to work with them. They're afraid that war will prevent their Ukrainian suppliers from delivering.
Of course, everybody is tired and exhausted, and sometimes they want to close their eyes and think that everything was just, I don't know, a bad dream, but of course we open the eyes and we keep fighting. Everybody is fighting at his place. My job is to make sure that the factories are working, people are getting salaries, I can help the soldiers, I can buy equipment.
But not every business can roll with the punches like this one. Vyacheslav tells us that at least a quarter of his competitors have already gone out of business, and the bankruptcies keep coming. For all the resilience on show, Ukraine's economy is still in freefall, leaving this country and its army ever more dependent on international support.
Earlier, I spoke with Timofey Milovanov, president of the Kyiv School of Economics and advisor to the Zelensky government. He served as Ukraine's former Minister of Economic Development, Trade and Agriculture from 2019 to 2020, and he told me what is most urgently needed to bolster the Ukrainian economy.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to correct 2 things. It's a nice soundbite to say that the economy is in free fall to finish the report, but that's not true. The economy is not in free fall. If we look at the dynamics month to month, it has stabilized. Actually, sometime around the summer and then later, attacks started on the critical infrastructure around October. So several months hit, and indeed there was a continuing deterioration. But the forecast, the actual estimates are not at 50%, but at 30%. The National Bank of Ukraine recently issued it. You are correct, absolutely, on the structural reasons. that Ukrainian companies manufacturing works under almost impossible conditions. And to answer your question, sure, quickly, what needs to stabilize of that? A, the stop of the war, of course. B, if that's missing, then international support. And of course, we need to work on the power grid, on the infrastructure, that the companies have sufficient electricity. Otherwise, they can't produce simply.
Okay, so we have a Ukrainian economy facing major challenges. A recent report from your institution, the Kyiv School of Economics, put the total damage to infrastructure at almost $138 billion. That is a staggering sum. Where are we seeing most of that damage?
Most of the damage is actually coming to the residential housing. 5 to 7% of all housing in the country have been destroyed. Of course, it has not been done uniformly in the east of Ukraine, in northern areas, in the south, where the fighting has taken place. That's where the damage is, and some towns have been completely destroyed, actually. But the second one is infrastructure related to logistics, to roads, and to electricity. That's where we see the major damage. And if to recover that, what we need to do is to focus on electricity, as I mentioned before, but also on logistics, on roads, on bridges, on connections, on very houses.
Okay. Now, we know over the last months, Russia has been repeatedly attacking critical infrastructure in Ukraine. How much longer do you think factories like the one that our correspondent visited can keep up production under these circumstances?
Very roughly speaking, we can or should separate the areas in those which are close to the front lines and which are further away. Those which are further away, they appear to be better protected, and also it appears that over the last weeks, the Russian attacks have moved mostly to those cities and towns which are closer to the front line. They continue to attack throughout the Ukraine, but the damage is mostly done in the east, closer to the areas where the front lines is. So if your factory, if our factory is in the front lines, then, they're getting disrupted daily or weekly because missiles, landing in their factories. This is awful, and it's very difficult to operate, and these are indeed near impossible conditions. So the answer there is better air defense, more weapons to the defense effort, and denying the Russian ability to attack. If we talk around the country more generally, that's basically helping with transformators, with power generators, so that they have electricity.
And is manpower an issue? We have some 8 million Ukrainians having left the country, tens of thousands of people wounded or killed. What kind of challenges do you think that this might pose for reconstruction in Ukraine?
Actually, I'm afraid the numbers would be in hundreds of thousands of civilians once the war is over, because I don't think we have all the data yet. And if you think about Mariupol alone in the spring last year, that's tens of thousands there. So I think you're correctly pointing out that the labor force, but I don't like to use this economic jargon term, labor force. These are people, these are humans, these are families, brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, children. Of course, a lot of people have been killed, a lot of people are traumatized, people have been wounded, incapacitated, many people left the country. So indeed, there is a problem with labor force if we talk about economy, and it is very, very difficult to find people to fill positions. And I think a lot of businesses which are active, which are working, they show and complain that it's very difficult to find people. That will be a challenge after the war.
Well, Timothy Milovanov, president of the Kyiv School of Economics, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us on DW News.